Welcome to Minutes with Mary, special podcast mini-series on the Enneagram. I'm your host, Mary Stilatello, certified Enneagram coach, and I'm joined by co-host Jayson Morris, also certified Enneagram coach and facilitator. We decided to launch this mini-series in celebration of World Enneagram Day on May 25th. The Enneagram has its roots in Greek philosophy, and in the last century, it has gained more exposure as a transformational framework. It offers insights on human nature, supporting self-awareness, team development, and organizational culture. Our aspiration is to share the Enneagram with more leaders, teams, and organizations. Each episode will explore different dimensions of the Enneagram and its value for strengthening your communication skills, navigating conflict, giving and receiving feedback, developing your leadership, building strong teams, and so much more. Let's get started. In today's episode of the Enneagram mini-series, Jayson and I will explore the 9 Enneagram leadership types and how their styles influence the way work is done in teams. Let's get started. Hi, Jayson. Welcome back. Let's do a quick check-in, settle in. How are you coming into today's conversation?
I'm good. I had a couple of wonderful coaching conversations in the last day, and I just found out that I might get to facilitate a workshop in Turkey later this year. So that's super exciting.
Ooh, very
How are you doing?
I am good. For me, I'm coming into today's conversation full of energy since we hosted our Taste of the Enneagram webinar yesterday, which was really fun. It was fun to share some of these important things with other folks. And I'm excited to dive a little deeper today into different leadership types. So for today's episode, listeners, we are going to explore the Enneagram in leadership. And I thought it might be helpful to start with the question of what is leadership? I've designed and facilitated leadership programs for youth and adults for decades, and that question can be answered in hundreds of different ways. And there's thousands of leadership books in every language. Leadership is contextual, it's cultural, it's situational. But one definition I've used over the years is by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. And they conducted research and they wrote a few books, but in particular, the Leadership Challenge, 5 Practices of Exemplary Leadership. And their definition is leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. And what I like about that definition is that it highlights that leadership is an art. It's not a science. It's not formulaic. It highlights that it's collective. You can't do leadership alone. And it recognizes there must be motivation or wants, and it's hard. It's a struggle, and there's a shared vision of moving in a particular direction. So, Jayson, when people ask you, what's leadership? How do you describe it? What does it look like to you, and what's it in your words?
I like to keep it short and sweet. So I say that leadership is the ability to inspire and motivate others. And that touches on a lot of what you just shared. What it looks like, I think, is an individual who's able to deeply connect with each person on their team, inspire them, hold them accountable, listen deeply, and make tough decisions, and continue to move the team towards its goals.
Mm-hmm. The listen deeply piece is one of the things I say to leaders when I'm working with them is like listening is the most important skill that you can have as a leader. And the power of the Enneagram is how it can provide leaders with that self-awareness and perspective on their natural way of leading. Leadership style, I really see it as an outgrowth of our Enneagram types. There are 9 different leadership styles that reflect what leaders of each type think is important or not important, and what they pay attention most to, and what they tend to ignore. And the leadership styles highlight our areas of strengths and our areas for development.
Totally agree. And before we get into the nine styles, I want to add one little aside, and that's that leaders can leverage the Enneagram to better understand the people on their team and how they think and feel and what motivates and demotivates them, what stresses them, and how they can best support them. So, in addition to understanding our own styles as leaders and what our strengths and challenges are, we can use the Enneagram to learn nine motivational languages. And I coach a lot of leaders and provide some cheat sheets to help people figure out how to navigate the conflict, how to give feedback, how to communicate more effectively using this Enneagram lens. And it really works. Perhaps that's just a topic for another day, but I think it's an important piece of this whole Enneagram puzzle.
It is absolutely a topic for another day. And team dynamics and using the Enneagram with teams, that I know is something that you and I both love because of how that just opens up and gives so much possibility to teams, in particular when they're feeling stuck and they don't know how to move forward and really leverage each other's talents. So, yes, we're going to do an episode on teams very soon. So, moving back to leadership styles, one of the internationally recognized Enneagram practitioners, Ginger Lepid Boga, has done a lot of work with leadership in teams, and her company, the Enneagram in Business, has done some work and written some books. And so we're going to share with you the framework and some thoughts around different styles based on her work. So see what resonates for you, listeners, as a leader, and maybe also think about if there's leaders you know and what you're hearing. Now, in the previous episode, we touched on the centers of intelligence briefly, and I shared that there are 9 types, and they're organized into 3 different centers: the acting, feeling, and thinking centers. And there are 3 types in each of these triads. So we're going to go through these leadership styles by triad, and we'll break it down that way. So Jayson's going to get us started with the acting triad, which are styles 8, 9, and 1.
And because this is a short podcast, we're going to go pretty quickly through them and then give some examples. So to kick us off, 8s lead by strategy and big action. Their view is that a leader's job is to move the organization forward by leading decisively and getting the right people on the bus and empowering them to take bold action. And it really is act first and then reflect. So their strengths as leaders are really about taking charge and being assertive, being bold and confident in the way forward. And where they often have areas of development is really around slowing down, particularly in times of uncertainty and needing to be a little bit more receptive to other people and other people's thoughts. And then often the case of overextending. So again, needing to figure out the right pace of things. 9s have a very different leadership style. They lead more by consensus. And their view is that a leader's job is to help achieve the collective mission by creating a clear structure and a harmonious work environment. And they are really strong at helping to create consensus, really listening to multiple perspectives, and having an organization or a team that values inclusivity and safety. And where they hit their development edge is sometimes in the need to take more of a firm stand or face conflict directly, communicate more directly, and also standing in their own confidence and their own strength. Sometimes we can't lead by consensus, and one person has to make that decision. And that can be really tough for 9 leaders. And then the third one in the triad is the type 1. And the type 1 leadership style is leading by example, setting standards. Type 1s often view the leader's job to set clear goals and to inspire others to achieve the highest quality work. Their strengths are in the high standards that they set and how that leads to people doing high quality work. Also being ethical and principled and in integrity. And 1s can hit a developmental edge in the need to delegate more and to let go of control. and to also relax some of their standards and this tendency to be overly critical in their pursuit of perfection. And then lastly, that rigidity, that pursuit of excellence can lead to really high stress. And so learning to relax some of that and 80/20 some of the work can help de-stress the environment.
Mm. And when you say 80/20 the work, what does that mean for a one?
Letting good be good enough. So getting 80% of the results as opposed
Mhm.
to needing to get 110%.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to hear like three different flavors or approaches to the acting triad. Like these are all in the acting triad, but their approach to acting is different. How have you seen these different styles play out with leaders that you've worked with?
Well, it's really interesting. I would say that across all of the leaders, there's a good reason for the way they do the things that they do, and they do it really well. So we often hit this place when coaching leaders where what has gotten them to where they are is not going to get them to where they want to go. So something they need to try something else. So with eights, this take charge assertiveness is often fantastic for organizations just starting out. We need that boldness, we need that confidence. But I'm working with an eight leader right now where the landscape of the world is changing, and this idea of having bold strategies and knowing the way forward and charging forward isn't working. And they need a softer, more emergent view because things are so complex and the data, the information that they need to know where to go isn't here yet. And they need to slow down and start listening and tapping into the wisdom of the team as opposed to being that bold and in charge leader. So, similarly with nines, this desire for consensus and harmony is really important and works until there's conflict or until there's tough conversations that need to happen. And so I've worked with nine leaders on how to find their voice, stand in their confidence, embrace conflict as a necessary means to getting to where we want to go. And there's an irony for nines in learning that sometimes being direct in their words and in their feedback actually leads to more harmony after they get through the conflict. And then ones, like I said, I've worked with a number of leaders that they have such high standards and they're in the highest integrity. And they need to learn how to relax and have a little bit of fun because they could charge the city of London with their worry and their energy. And so how do they let their hair down, so to speak, and really start to embrace good enough? One of the things that I'll talk to my one leaders about is there's one of my mentors, Aranio Pace, says to leaders, is it better to be right or to be happy? And that's one that type ones can really work with.
Probably stops them in their tracks.
It's a good one to orient to. It's a good way to
Yeah,
pause. So
great.
why don't we pivot and I'll let you tackle the feeling triad, which is the
Sure.
type twos, threes, and fours.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So the type two leadership style is really driven by leading by encouragement and motivation. And they see their job as assessing the strengths and areas of development of their team members and to really motivate and facilitate people toward the achievement of goals. And they're doing that through heart space versus action space. And that's sort of that different feeling. And so their strengths are really seen in empathy and motivating of others, really seeing others. Where they have areas of development is setting some boundaries around themselves and not over engaging with their team members and sort of getting in the weeds. Also, aspects of communication that may be uncomfortable because the type 2 styles really want to feel liked and cared about. So, the leaders 3 style, we see leading by goals and plans and results. And these leaders really want to create an environment that achieves results because people understand the organization's goals and structures, then they're going to get moved towards results. So they're very focused on staying productive, getting things done, feeling like they're reaching their milestones. And where they can have trouble or challenges in development is feeling impatient and needing to slow down and not intervening so much because they're afraid there might be failure. So taking a breath and paying attention to what's happening with the people on their team. And then for the four leadership style, they really like to lead with vision and also connection. So you can hear in all of these styles the elements of feeling that are coming out. They're just coming out in different ways. And four leaders really see that their role is to create organizations that give meaning and purpose so that their team members feel inspired to do excellent work. So their strengths are around creating that deep vision and connecting with the emotions of others deeply and feeling those emotions of others. Now, on the flip side of that, they often can have some development areas around not taking things too personally or feeling overly connected to other people's emotions. So having that separation from the emotions of others and themselves.
And how have you seen these styles play out with your clients?
It's interesting with one of the two leaders who I've worked with, and she had a big team, and trying to manage a big team was incredibly challenging for her because of her orientation towards wanting to motivate and understand everyone. And so she really recognized this aspect of her style. It dawned on her that, wow, setting boundaries is so important for me to be able to have the energy that I need to manage a large team. So it was really eye-opening for her to see that contrast about over giving herself and feeling like she needed to be engaged with all of her team members. With working with a three leader, and I know, Jayson, you can add to this as well. But what I've noticed is sometimes leaders from the three style really push their teams too hard because they like to push themselves hard. And there's that risk of burnout. And because the achievement is so important, there can be a risk of undervaluing the relationships and just getting to the finish line. So it may feel like they're being self interested and not paying attention to the people. So that impatience piece can come through.
That definitely rings true.
Yeah, and you're aware of that now. You know that. I mean, as you shared in one of our other episodes, where you're like, I wait, type my emails and then I wait and then I add the part that has the feeling and emotion because that's your natural inclination. So, and then I've worked with a four leader for really quite some time, and her experience in recognizing her style and areas for development, what was really eye opening for her was recognizing I am not my emotions, and the level that I share my emotions can be way too much for other people. So that regulating her feelings piece was something that was really important and helpful for her to be able to support her team in a way that they needed. All right, we're going to close around the bend here and talk about the thinking triad, which are styles 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, so five's leadership style is oriented to leading by research and deliberation and planning to provide an effective organization, making sure that systems fit together. And it's a knowledge-based approach. And their strengths are in their objectivity, their logical analysis of things. And fives also are really good at providing autonomy to their team because they value autonomy so much themselves. And the developmental areas are around approachability and emotional connectivity. So getting out of the head and getting into the relational field and all of that. So emotions, getting to know each other on a personal basis. Again, may not be needed for a while, but in order to build that psychological safety that is so important for team performance, eventually 5 leaders are called into doing more of this. 6 leadership style is around creative problem solving. And their view is that a leader's job is to solve organizational problems by developing this creative problem solving environment where people feel like they are part of the solution. And they are really strong at perceiving various threats, different scenarios to address that. 6s by nature are very loyal and trustworthy. So they build loyal and trustworthy teams. And there is a strength around being calm in crisis. There's an irony around 6s that there's a lot of anxiety ahead of challenges and in scenario planning. But the moment there's a crisis or a challenge, 6s get very calm and centered. Their developmental edge is around risk. Often there is too little risk taking. And there's a certain type of 6 that the way they deal with the fear is actually to go in head first. And so they actually might take too much risk. And then there can be this slowing down that happens with 6 leaders around analysis paralysis and this fear of making mistakes and the worry kind of getting caught in the cycle of worrying and slowing down too much to make decisions. 7's leadership style is around ideas and innovation. And their view is that a leader's job is to get people excited and to create innovative ideas and new ventures so that an organization can take advantage of new business opportunities. And their strengths as leaders is around being innovative and positive, infectious in their leadership, and really enlisting others in the vision and the ideas for the way forward. And their developmental edge, it can be around being able to stay focused and actually see some of these ideas through to the finish line, as well as adhering to limits and seeing the challenges as well as the positives. So 7s sometimes need to pause and spend time in the uncertainty or in the negative emotions, the negative possibilities before finding their way out of that, because their tendency is to be overly optimistic.
Mhm. Yeah. So sounds like you've worked with a handful of these different styles. And what have you noticed in working with the leaders in this thinking triad?
Well, I've gotten to see some of these strengths and challenge areas play out. I just started working with a 5 leader who I'm super excited to work with. And this idea of approachability and emotional connectivity seems to be the topic that we're going to be really exploring. And the feedback that they've gotten is that they're so buttoned up in terms of their planning and how they lead so deliberately that there's maybe a gap in terms of people's ability to connect to them. And so we're going to be exploring what it's like to allow people in and what vulnerability looks like as a leader. With 6s and a few 6 leaders, it's that analysis paralysis that has gotten in the way, and the ability to scenario plan and to see all the alternatives is a beautiful strength. And yet at times we've just got to take action and move forward. And particularly, I would say over the last couple of years, because of the way of the world with the pandemic and everything else that has gone on, that there's been a lot of 6 energy in the world, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, and that overlaid on the 6 style has led to things slowing down too much. And so there's been a lot of work in how to move things forward, how to trust gut intuition, in addition to thinking through all of the different scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And then with 7s, this idea of focus is really important. Like I said, when I was going through it, the opposite of 6s in many ways, needing to pause and really sit in the challenge, sit in the difficulty, rather than flutter out of it and look for all of the new exciting possibilities. And so I've been working with some 7 leaders to slow down and to find the superpower or the strength in actually attuning to the challenges and the negative emotions,
Mhm.
and how that's a critical piece of the equation for them and for their teams.
Yeah. As you're talking about these different leaders that you've worked with, what was coming up for me, and I know we'll talk about this more in another episode, but is the ability to lean into the wings or the styles on either side of that core style. So, as you were just talking about the seven leaders and them needing to slow down, it's like you have this style right next door to you, seven leaders, which is the six. And how could that possibly help you slow down? Because it's familiar to you. You're just not paying attention to it. Or with the five leaders who are actually next door to the fours, in the feeling triad. And so, helping them connect over to that style that is actually part of what makes them who they are and balancing with those wings. So, that's an area we'll talk about later, but it was just popping up for me when you were talking about these leaders that you've
Yeah.
been working with.
The other thing I would add to that is they can lean it into to themselves. I also talk to leaders about when we do this work with teams, and I know we have an upcoming podcast where we're going to talk about teams.
Yeah.
We can look for people that are already in that type, in one of the wings or the arrow lines, that naturally have that counterbalancing strength, and quite literally walk over to their office and tap into that. So that seven that you're talking about that maybe is too positive and needs a little bit more risk management perspective, they can walk over to the six in the office next door and say, hey, Mary, help me think through all the scenarios, all the risks here. And you're naturally playing into somebody's strength. So you're building that yourself, but you're also getting it from your team. And I think that is where, and I'm excited to do this team podcast, but that's where we can really use this it's almost like we become the Power Rangers, where we're each our individual robot, but we become the super robot when we combine forces.
Totally. And that's why I love working with teams, because we get to see actually a person in their natural flow and their natural style and learn from that, shifting that perspective by paying attention to how they approach something or what their perspective is on something. And so valuable. So, listeners, we're getting close to the end. And I just want to mention, as I began the podcast, I mentioned in the definition that leaders mobilize others. So effective leaders of all Enneagram types really need to honor these areas of strength and pay attention to the development areas that we just shared with you. At the same time, leaders also need to be able to respond to their team's needs and adapt their own leadership behaviors based on where their team is in the stage of development. And the inability to adjust their leadership styles not only can hinder a team's progress, but it can also actually stall it out. So that's why we're really excited to talk about teams in one of our upcoming episodes. Jayson, as we're coming to the end of this episode, what would you like our listeners to leave with today regarding the Enneagram and leadership styles?
Yeah, so I've often been asked the question, is there a certain type that makes a good leader? And what I would say is all types have the potential to be great leaders if they become more self-aware of their innate strengths as well as their challenge areas, and they're committed to doing the work so that they move out of this unconscious reaction and into more of a conscious response. And if they can pause and think about how to get the most out of their team. All leaders need this humility to see their limitations and then the discipline to work on them. And not everybody has that, but I think that's what makes a good leader.
Yes. Self-awareness and the desire to do the work. I just was talking with a leader this morning who's familiar with the Enneagram, and he was like, but I like the way I think. It's like, okay, well, there's an opportunity for you to explore a little further. that piece. And that's that hard part, that challenge part, right? Leaders are working on challenging to be their best and working with their teams. So, listeners, in our next episode, we will continue to explore this topic of leadership in teams. As you can see, Jayson and I are very excited and juiced up about talking about teams, and that is coming up. So, how can the Enneagram provide a roadmap for team success at the various stages of development will be something that we'll explore soon.